All right, Zig coming in on the top 10 of the show, we have Eszter Balint, singer, songwriter, actor, artist, violinist extraordinaire. She's worked with a ton of amazing musicians and actors. You might know her from Jim Jarmusch's Stranger Than Paradise. She also did a film with Steve Buscemi in The Trees Lounge. She also worked alongside Mia Farrow, John Malkovich in Woody Allen's Shadow in the Fog. She also has toured alongside renowned musical artists such as Tammy Faye Starlight, Marc Ribot, Elliott Sharp, Dana Kurtz, John Zorn, and the Swans. A pretty renowned intro. And she grew up in a very unique situation in which her family ran a theater called Squat Theater. And it was an avant-garde art hub in New York. And so many profound artists ran through that and interacted with it, and to live and grow up in that environment is profound and fascinating, and to hear her stories with it, from the good and the bad, and to be surrounded by this creative energy all the time is mind-blowing, and you're going to hear that in a bit. Before we get to it, Eszter has a new album coming out called I Hate Memory, and this is one of the most, I think, potent, honest records I've heard in a long time. So she dives into that good and bad of this experience growing up in this super creative environment. And there's way more to it. That's just my perception of it. And so this record has two parts. It's an on-stage performance as well as a recorded performance. So the record's out, and it's on all the streaming platforms. But there's also the live performance aspect of it, which tells more of the story and has more. It's what Eszter calls anti-musical. It's an anti-musical, and in the conversation she explains that more. But there's acting, and there's more bits to it that the record doesn't have. So if you can see this performed, you should. But the record's out now. We're going to listen to a tune off I Hate Memory. This is Art Bodega Nation. Art Bodega Nation, I Hate Memory, available on all the streaming stuff. And yeah, and just listening to that, you get a taste of the story. Now, I highly recommend you listen to the whole thing to make the narrative more clear. And that might have been a weird one to jump in on, but I think that was a really impactful with my first listen, was that track in particular. Anywho, during this conversation, Eszter and I hit this really interesting point about the uncomfortable comfortableness, right? When you go out there and you do something because it's what you love to do, but you make yourself uncomfortable, and being comfortable with that uncomfortable place, and how difficult and how rewarding and how challenging that can be. And this was a really insightful conversation, and to come from a talent such as Eszter and hear these insights was very, very cool. And I'm very excited to share this conversation with you guys. Before I do that, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Eszter and sharing their insights with you. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it. This is my conversation with Eszter. What do you teach?
Yeah. I teach singing. I'm like kind of vocal coaching, voice teaching, a kind of mix between the two. And I also have mostly younger students, not all, but like teens. And so, yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, is it like, to kind of jump into it, like coming from like a background in like theater, or literally like growing up in theater,
Yep.
learning to like throw your voice and project and be able to like use that oomph that takes time to develop, like, is that kind of where you think singing stemmed from for you?
No, I wouldn't say that. And also our theater never really worked on quote projecting, and I'm still always fighting yes, you have to have a certain level of excitement to be heard, but I'm all for using microphones. And we're of the, as now it's called in the singing industry, we're microphone singers. So the whole thing about really working on projecting can actually, in my opinion, lead you a little bit astray and you know, kind of putting on a little bit of a fakey voice just for the sake of volume, or and that can kind of sometimes take you away from actually connecting to what's actually going on emotionally in a song.
Yeah.
So I don't think projecting was a big thing for me. I've always loved the human voice, like as a kid, and loved music. And I remember like being 7 years old at my grandparents' house and listening to the magic flute and singing along, and my grandmother peeking in from the kitchen and saying, "Oh my God, that was you? I wasn't sure if that was you or the recording." And she was obviously being just, you know, a doting grandmother. But I just remember the moment I was alone and so into it. And there's something about singing that is so just direct, sensory, emotional, without anything between you and your feelings.
Yeah, but no, it's,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's super vulnerable, and like there's this whole the breathing part of it, and like the deliver, like that totally makes sense to me. And like I found it interesting. You said you work with like people, like kids in their teens, and that's such a like interesting time for any person emotionally. So like.
Hell yeah. My show is kind of about that in a way, you know.
The show and the album, like, is that after I listened to the advance Howard sent me before, like, reading anything, and I do that with everybody just to, like, hear.
Great.
Like,
I love that.
You know, like, to get just, like, a, what is this? To be a new viewer, new listener. And, like, I was like, this is, there's something going on. Like, this is really, like, potent. There's something going on here. And then diving into your, like,
thank you.
Musical career and everything you've done, I'm like, holy shit, this is, like, one of the most, like, vulnerable, like, real albums I think I've heard in a while. I'm like, this is...
Wow. I really appreciate that. And let me tell you, it was not and still isn't easy for that. I was just saying that I really appreciate you pointing that out, especially because that vulnerability is really not easy. You know, it's still, when I do the show, there's a struggle in it. It's tricky, you know, it's tricky to be that exposed.
But that, I think that, because I've dove into the, like, with listening to like Mud or Airless Midnight, like those are both beautiful records, but there's something that with this one that just makes it like this is you, like, and it comes off like for not even knowing anything about you, like the first listen that was there too, but like going in with some history of like, oh man, this is going deep. So like,
I love that. Thank you.
Well, it's excellent. It's an excellent record.
Thank you.
But like kind of, so to catch everyone out, it's also a show. So like, what brought about the anti-musical aspect of it? Like, was that the main idea before the album, or?
Yes and no. So yes, it was the main idea before the album, and we even worked on it. But in terms of the songs that make up the album, those were the first and fundamental and most crucial ingredients of the show. So that everything else was always kind of built around the songs, which were the first thing to come out of this project. So the anti-musical idea came about. I'm starting to use that term anti-musical completely seriously, by the way, as though it's a real thing, even though it's just this sort of goofy punk rock take on musical. But I just think it's totally appropriate, and I'm going with it. But it came about because Stu and the Negro Problem and Passing Strange, that musical, and I decided to work on something, and together. And that's kind of his world, like shows now. I mean, he used to just do records and band, but now he also is very deep in the theater and quote anti-musical world. So he said to me, well, I'm sure many people have asked you, and I'm sure you've thought about this, but what about doing something about your growing up in New York and in that whole amazing world that everybody's so curious about and constantly wants to know about. And my first reaction was, wow, I know there are amazing and important stories that I am a witness to and participant to from that era, but I'm not comfortable enough to put myself at the fore in that way. Like my memoir, that's just not how I roll. That's not me. And also into nostalgia and looking back and romanticizing the past. And he said, those two things you just said, that is exactly why you're the person who should do this. So I was like, okay, challenge accepted.
Was it?
So that came about.
That's it's funny, like with the whole, because there's the whole, I can't remember, it's near the latter half of the record, there's the one song that says memoir, sell your memory, like this idea of like, and the whole nostalgia being one of the tracks.
Yep.
Romanticizing of it. Like, I think I agree with him. Like, if you're not going to go into it like that, you're going to get more of an honest picture of what it was. And
exactly. That was, I think, his, without even saying those words, that was he's a very smart, discerning cat. That's true. Yeah. And I think that was exactly his instinct, that not getting too romanticized about it, and just not getting too me, let me tell you my story about it, is exactly why it's going to be maybe even more honest in some ways. And also what I did was, I thought, well, okay, this is a real struggle for me for those reasons that I just mentioned. So why don't I bring the topic of the struggle in the telling itself? And that's where, like, the songs like Nostalgia and that song about, privacy, and even this opening track, I remember, like, there are like 2 or 3 songs on the album that are kind of like meta commentary on this whole endeavor.
The second song right after I'm trying to remember it, Art
Bodega Nation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In particular, because like it seems like because I dove into a bunch of other interviews with you, like seems like a lot of people bring up the squat theater and like the magic behind it, but also like I work at a nonprofit art gallery in Cleveland, and there's nights that aren't magic. There's plenty of nights where you're like,
hello, yep. Well, that's the whole thing about magic is magic because it's fleeting and momentary, and it cannot be sustained. And once you try, and it's just like people talking about touring, right? We see these bands on tour, and maybe for that 90 minutes, and probably not even all of that, it is magic, but there's a lot of not magic around it.
Where do they park that van to get here? Like,
yeah, exactly. And why is there beer spilled on the microphone? And and just like doing that, those days were incredibly magical in one sense, because there was this of community and exchange of ideas and a respect for the essential thing of art, which has kind of disappeared a little bit from our culture. So it was an incredibly magical time, but it was also dangerous, druggy. We were poor, there's interpersonal conflict like any other time in his. So it's not all magic.
Well, and it's the balance of the two, and like the magic's always gonna persevere. Everyone's gonna grab onto that, because during all that stuff you need that. I mean, like,
yes,
to think like some of the groups that like were around at the time, like the Lounge Lizards and DNA and like the No Wave stuff. Like, I'd imagine like a lot of that, like when you see it now, you're like, what is going on? This is wild. But like if you're there, like this is something that we're here. This is okay. Like,
yes. And the thing is to be honest about that, it's not all magic all the time is important, because otherwise it turns into something almost fetishy, and I am not into that. I'm not into fetishizing anything. So I'm interested in exploring the contradictions of things. And so I appreciate picking up on that.
Was it, and that's, I think, exploring those contradictions makes whatever you're looking at more seen and more like, if it can withstand both ends of, like, yeah, it was kind of shitty, but it was also kind of great,
Yeah,
like, if you can bring both ends to it, it makes it a more full thing. It makes it a more full experience, and like,
absolutely.
that's like, but so, like, okay, so did Stu, like, was he aware of, like, of the theater and of your history?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes. In fact, I love meeting Stu because I mean I'd known of him and we'd probably been in the same room a bunch of times, and I'd heard of his band because I did a little stint living in LA for a while, and I saw Passing Strange at the Public before it went to Broadway and loved it. But then I went to see another show of his, and I thought, man, this guy's mind, it resonates with mine. There's something going on there that, like, my brain and my senses were like a little bit on fire just watching his show. Which is like, I'm going to go up to him after the show and introduce myself. Like, I just have to. Usually I'm kind of shy and about stuff like that. And when I went up to him and I said, Stu, this was amazing. I'm Eszter. And the first thing he said to me is, Eszter from Squat? Let's do something.
No way.
Yeah. And I was just thrilled. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And part of that's that magic reaching out, like, even though, like, all the there's all the bad stuff with it, those, for certain people, that experience is always going to be a highlight. And, like, I'm sure it is for you as well, like,
Yep.
even though, like, that there's the cleaning up the room at the end of the night or sleeping there.
Yeah. Oh, there was a lot of that. There definitely was a lot of that.
But that's so, and that's where the whole anti-musical, like, started, or, like, it was.
Yeah, that's where it all started. Yeah, that's after he was like, let's do something, and I was like, that's exactly what I was thinking, but you said it first. Awesome. And then we just got together and had a bunch of conversations, and that's when he was like, well, isn't it obvious that you should do something about those years and you growing up? And at first I was like, no. And then we kind of figured out a way around my hangups about it. He actually hasn't been involved with the development of the show and the live performance, but he did write pretty much all the songs with me, except maybe for one. And he is kind of all over the record. So.
Well, I imagine
very cool.
He's a pretty busy individual, yeah.
Very.
Yeah.
He's got his hands in a lot of different stuff, and he teaches a few different courses. So,
yeah.
But it's cool because I think, I'm really grateful that is a word that's been so overused lately. But I'm really thankful that he kind of jump started this, and that's really his spirit is all over this project, and maybe we'll do something else sometime down the line, but I've got a really great team now for the live show, so it's not like it depends on his availability or participation.
So you guys developed the songs together, and then when you took it to the live show, what was that kind of process like?
So that process, he was still initially involved in the sense of just. Stu was such a great foil for me because, like with all the songs, he just said, well, tell me a little bit about the songs, and set them up for me. It was almost like set the songs up for me. And I did a shitload of writing at that point. I just wrote, and that writing, that sort of setting up the songs, became the show, essentially. And I mean, through a lot of revisions, and there are like a few little scenes, and it's still a work in progress. So we have a show coming up in January, and we're going to definitely shake it up since the last one. But that writing, that prompt that he gave me to sort of set the little, that really became the essence of the show, other than the songs. So he was just a great foil for me, because when I write, when I work, when I create, even when I perform, I'm all about, I need a like-minded individual who I respect, that I'm speaking to, you know, who I want to connect with. That's my impetus. Everybody has their own, and we are all wired a little differently. That's mine. And so, like I said, Stu's mind kind of, I feel like, resonates with mine. There's something about his way of thinking and his synapses, the way they fire, that speaks to me. So he was a great foil for me to prompt me into writing these monologues and texts around the songs.
It's interesting because like I was just talking about this last night with a friend. Like the idea that like any expression, right? Like sonically or communal, just any, it has to be like perceived and received in a way. If not, I don't think that would be even a mode of like thought. You'd be so sensory deprived of that thing. Like if you didn't, if there was no other people to sing or play with or to, like, would you sing and or play, or would you just that sensory, you know what I mean, just in like
such a good thing to explore, because to me, no, but I don't know, maybe there are some other people out there that are wired really differently, that are perfectly content to do it. But I don't know if I believe that. I think even the most solitary creators and writers have somebody in mind, right?
Yeah.
That they are communicating with, because art, I mean, if it's not about connection, what is it?
Right. Right. Then that was the point, like, of this
Yeah.
conversation we had. It was like,
Yeah.
where does it leave that? And like,
Yeah.
so I totally
Yeah.
relate to that, finding that like mind to like spark that, even if it's just an offhand comment, like, oh, you know, this is cool. You know what I mean? You're like,
Exactly. I think, like, we all wish to be seen, you know,
Yeah.
and that's just such a great, satisfying process to communicate in that way through art.
well, so do you work with, like, as far as like, because listening to the last two records, like,
Yeah.
was having this prompt like something that was kind of new for music in a way?
Yes, very much so. Well, I would say that my last record, Airless Midnight, I think there is a very strong theme in there that goes throughout of what I was going through at the time with my I lost my dad, and I was thinking about him a lot, and was thinking about death was kind of a big theme on Airless Midnight. I don't know if it comes through or not, but for me, on a very more kind of buried, almost half-conscious, very personal level, there was a little bit of a thematic thread there for me in that collection of songs. But this was much more overt in that way. And it's actually a really interesting question for me moving forward. Like, will I be able to make another record that is just kind of an arbitrary collection of songs, or will I really always need a bigger container to hold the purpose of? And I don't know the answer to that yet, but it's something I've already started thinking about.
Yeah, because like it seems like once you start writing like that, like the song cycle thing is equally rewarding and challenging, but like the idea of doing that for a bigger narrative seems like a bigger challenge, and then the kind of like, oh, I can do that too. Like it seems like there'd be no going back, but you know.
Yeah, I mean the only way of. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't. Get back to me in like 6 months or a year, okay? With that question, I'll tell you what I've discovered. I don't know. And the not knowing place is actually cool and okay. I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think that's it's a tough place for a lot of people to be in, that not knowing. But there's also that beauty of the not knowing, and
the beauty of discovering and play, right?
Yeah. I don't know, I talk with my sister a lot, and like the not knowing, and like realizing how awful it is to not know, but also kind of for myself looking back a little bit, like with my journey and not knowing and like being okay with that. And like how it's like exciting and awful at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. There you go again with those contradictions, right?
But okay, like so with Airless Midnight, was Marc Ribot? Were you working with him around the squat scene? Like, how'd you meet him?
He is actually an old friend of mine.
Yeah.
He was around back in the old days with the Lounge Lizards, so I knew him from back then, and we just I would say more than casually for sure, but not really close friends. Like we were friends, you know, we're in the same tribe. We had conversations, and then we became closer friends more like in the last, I don't know, 20 years. Well, you know, here's what happened. When I moved back from LA, we did this one track together. That in a way like created more of a working relationship between him and I. And it was a track on a John Zorn collection, a tribute to Serge Gainsbourg. And it went really well. So J.D. Foster, who produced my previous albums, was producing this track for Marc. And they wanted a singer to come in. And JD said, well, I'm working with Eszter. Why don't we bring her in? I think she speaks French. And because we sang some of it in French, or was it all of it? And so that went really well. It was just kind of like a magical recording that went fast and well, and we clicked. Again, it was like that click thing that we were talking about before. And so after that, Ribot called me in for a few different things over the years. Like we did that stuff live, his Cubanos Postizos record. And then I actually toured for a while with his band Ceramic Dog, which was a great experience. I was really in the big leagues with those guys. I mean, they're just phenomenal. Do you know that band?
Yeah. No, like I watched a few live performances with you with them, and and like because that's why I was wondering like if that was part of like because like I forget which performance one of them you were switching like between a melodica, violin, and doing harmonies, and like you were doing all this stuff, and like listening to everything that was going on. I'm like, this is beautifully accompanying what Marc's doing here, and like to be able to pick up in different things and really bring out these aspects of this song, and like.
Oh, cool! I'm glad you said that. Well, it was really that was a scary jumping off the ledge experience for me because those three guys are just so insanely good, and they'd already had their thing, you know. They'd been doing that band for years, so for me to jump in was like. And also Marc's funny, like he there's not a ton of knowing what you're going to have to be doing on stage beforehand, so you have to really roll with it. Like he'll play scribbly sheet music in front of you 5 minutes before the show, and you don't know what the set list is and all that. And so there's a lot of really nerve-wracking jumping off the ledge. And I think he is very smart and does that on purpose, both to himself and to his musicians, because he wants nothing ever to rote. So when you're hanging on for dear life, there's definitely an intensity of intention that comes through that I think conceptually he really likes. But sometimes I did feel like saying to him, well, don't you know, I already feel like this just in everyday life, walking down the street. I don't need to be pushed off the edge. I'm already like
living on that.
But it was a really cool, like school to go through.
Yeah, those performances are amazing, and how you guys work as a group. And I don't know if it's from the sheer terror of I hope this lands or what, but like I think there's something to be said that it's alive with that, you know. And
yes, alive is a great word. It's very alive with that, and I do think he deliberately. I haven't checked this with him, so if he listens and gets mad at me, I'm so sorry. But I think he sort of deliberately creates that sheer terror atmosphere to keep that intensity in the show. And maybe it's just me. Maybe those guys are so totally like pros beyond pros beyond pros that they don't feel that. But certainly for me, it was sheer terror. But I enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
I really did.
Well, leaving the stage like that and feeling good, like when you do a take right, or just when it lands and you're like, I never thought I would do that, and like there's like an uplift from that. There's a dopamine spike of we made this work. How do we do that? How are we going to do that tomorrow? Like that is unlike no other.
Yeah, because he has toured a lot. He might need more of that.
Oh,
because otherwise it probably would get So I could see how that's a cool strategy when you're on the road a lot.
Did kind of like coming from like the avant-garde theater like realm, did that like kind of like yes and or like living on the edge of not knowing, were you like kind of always uncomfortably comfortable with that? Like
yes. The short answer is yes. I'm very, let's put it this way, I'm very familiar with it. It never gets comfortable. And so that world of like what we were just discussing, that energy of touring with Ribot, was very familiar in that sense to me, and from the theater experience. And every show was a do or die. Every invention was like, maybe this will work, maybe this won't. And if it doesn't, it's not just like, oh, what the hell, it wasn't a great show, so what, there'll be one tomorrow. It's like, you fucked up, like it was like the world isn't like, it was just, the stakes are very high. And I will say, circling back to the romanticizing issue, that when I would now say, with a more mature perspective and being a mom myself, that when you're like 10 years old and still forming, that may be a bit much. for your nervous system. And I think it has kind of impacted me for life. And not all in good ways, but yes. So that's the long answer to your question. Yes, it is the comfortably uncomfortable, or whatever, however we want to say it. Yes.
Was it? Yeah. That, I mean, like the sense of it's interesting because like that's such a like a trying spot to like be and find yourself, and like it's such a growing atmosphere, right? To be in that uncomfortably comfortable spot, like the always like putting yourself in a new situation to move and grow from it. But there's also like the balance of, okay, I have accomplished this. I know how to do that. Having that comfort to back up that uncomfortableness, I think, is equally as important too. Like
totally agree. And it's really actually from that sweet spot of having true confidence that comes from having the experience, having the knowledge, having the skill even, and then like the sweet spot is then being able to take huge risks and kind of jumping off the ledge, but still there's an innate confidence that is just backed up by experience. And that's a really hard sweet spot to find. Right. I certainly don't always find it, but I think it's a good one to chase.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I think that's well said. Kind of like with music, singing and like kind of like expressing yourself vocally. When did you get a violin in your hand?
Well, the violin was I was really young. My mom, I think, took me to, this is kind of a cool story because I'm going to name drop for a second.
Okay.
But in Hungary, trigger warning, name drop warning. In Hungary, my mom took me to our good family friend. Do you know George Kortog, the composer, who's like, he is become like a really heavy, he had his first big opera, I think, here and recently, but he's been around and in the classical world, massively respected, and he's a genius. P.S. But he was a family friend, really good friend with my grandfather, and friends with my dad. And he looked at my hand. My mom was thinking piano because she had played piano, and he looked at my hands and he was like, "But she's got violinist hands." So that was that. So that was when I was like 6, and my grandmother and mom signed me up for classical violin lessons with a wonderful teacher who I still remember to this day. I did not stick with the classical violin eventually. I mean, we left Hungary and I tried to continue and found some different teachers, but our life was so chaotic. And I didn't really persist for that much longer. Like I probably off and on studied classical violin for around 8 years, off and on. But the point was that this first teacher I had was a phenomenal teacher. She gave me some really amazing foundational skills so that even when I kind of abandoned the violin for quite a few years, maybe even a decade, once I picked it up again, I did have a good relationship with the instrument.
That's incredible.
So that was really my first musical instrument. Yep.
That's it. Like with some of the like to jump off and come back to it. Like that's an incredible lesson. Whatever, however they presented it in a way, like because as a kid you're thinking of so many things, and there's so many things that are cool, like jumping or whatever. You know what I mean? Like to take.
Yes. Well, I think there was a little bit of a. I mean, there was a little bit of a pragmatic aspect to that, like, oh, I'm doing my own music now. I'm a singer-songwriter. Hey, I know what would come in handy,
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of that. And then earlier too, like, there was a little novelty aspect to it when I was a teen and growing up in that crazy scene where everybody was in a band and playing music. And I think there weren't that many violinists around. So I had that as a little bit of an asset, like, oh, I can kind of scratch out a tune on this thing. I played on this cool recording, which I'm not sure if you're aware of, but it's that recording produced by Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Yeah.
And it's yeah. So you know that, and so that was the first time I ever recorded with my violin.
Jeez, that's talk about the fear, the comfortably uncomfortable.
Hello, terrified, and with like the coolest guys in the room that you could possibly think of, and especially like listening to Ramalzi doing that rap, and then his friends in the saying to me, funk it up, and I'm like, oh, how do you do that on the violin?
So I am aware of that, but what brought that up? How did that? Was that just from them seeing you in the theater and seeing you play, or?
I was friends with Basquiat, so we had a relationship, and he knew that I played violin. And I had actually played the violin in a few public settings in like weird conceptual art bands that I was in for like 5 minutes, it was the time, and that was the era. We were all, and again, there was a novelty aspect to me. Like, hey, Esther's the one with the violin. Like, no, that wasn't a big thing. There weren't that many people. Well, there was this amazing guy, Boris Police Band, who could really play, and a few other people. But as far as girls, there wasn't really anyone. So I had already made a few appearances with the violin as a young girl, and I think Jean-Michel just remembered that and said, "Hey, I'm making a recording." And it was just, it's actually a good story in that it's such a reflection of how organically things happened in that time. That is very foreign to us now. But making a recording wasn't about hiring so and so and so and so from the roster. It was like, which cool friend of mine who I have a relationship with plays that instrument. Let's call them in. That's so cool,
because that's like I've recently like kind of experienced a fair amount of loss, and like this last year
Mm,
I've been like trying to work with I play in a band, and we've been trying to put together
mhm.
this record, and I'm like reaching out to all these friends that we play with that kind of like have a little time capsule for myself of like, you
Mm,
remember when Leah had her band or Benny was in his band? Like, let's see if they can
yeah.
record something with us, and then I can remember, just like to have this like this little capsule of like friendship and where everyone was at, because that is
Yeah.
that is
Ah.
and like so I definitely
It's
agree with that.
wonderful,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's actually maybe it is still happening in some circles, and maybe amongst younger people, like maybe there is still that spirit of like people in high school are like, hey, you like guitar, right? Learn three chords and let's form a band.
yeah, yeah. I definitely think that's somewhere out there, but like I agree with you, like in like the bigger picture of things, where like the more music that's fed to you in a way or put together in like professional situation is like is more like how you said. Here's the register, you can pick from them.
Uh,
These are our
yeah.
punk people.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know,
These
like,
are our A list. There's our B list. Yeah.
and right now Dave can afford the D list.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but but yeah, and then like so, there's that is the non like magic, non polished magic. I think and that's cool to hear that that's what that recording was.
Very much so. And the great thing about that non-polished magic that existed a lot at the time is that I do want to point out it was, while on one hand it was like, hey, dude, you've played guitar in your life, right? Come and be in this band. There was a bit of that attitude, but it was also people were really trying to do things. They weren't just, you know,
Yeah,
the personnel might have been made up of community and like-minded members who weren't necessarily the A-listers from the list, but the spirit of doing something that mattered was serious. That was serious business. So it was cool that way.
yeah. Well, and that's much more pure intention that get behind and understand and be inspired by. You know,
Yep.
did
Yep.
with that kind of whole like scene, did you ever cross paths with like a Lydia Lunch or a Adele Bertay?
Yes, Adele quite a lot, Lydia less.
Okay,
And I actually am friends with Adele.
she's
You
great.
know,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, she's great. Um, she's such a fireball of creativity. I don't know if you're aware, but she has a book out that's
yeah.
so great.
Which one?
Um,
Which one? She's got a
Pe-
few. Peter and the
she's well,
Wolves. Yeah.
Peter and the Wolves. Yeah, it's so awesome. Yeah.
Did you know
Uh,
Peter Loeffner?
I did not.
Okay.
I did not. Um, but Lydia, funnily enough, I actually, we knew a lot of the same people, and I was younger than
Mm.
everyone else. So certain people, like even for me, who was really brave and really like adventurous, scared me a little.
Yeah.
And I think Lydia might have been one of them.
She'd probably like that. I think like
I know she would. That's what I'm willing to say. Actually, I think even Adele back in those days scared me a little
Yeah.
because, but they played at Squat, with
Okay.
James Chance and the
Yeah.
Contortions, and I would see Adele like she was tiny, this little thing, but she was on that slamming on that keyboard like
Yeah.
there's no tomorrow, and there was just almost a violent spirit to their thing that was like, this chick is cool. I better steer clear of her. And then later we became good friends. So
Did you was she in LA at the time you were in LA?
yeah, that's
Oh,
that's
okay.
really where that's really where we became friends. It was a little less scary in
Yeah.
that context.
'Cause, I talked with her about her book because I was really interested, well, in her career, but also reading her book and hearing about Peter and like what a character he
Right.
is. And
Yeah.
she's created, I think, a really big wave with it. Because I was just talking with David J from Bauhaus, and he was talking about how he got really influenced by Peter Lofter in this record, and I was like, have you read Adele's book? And like, but like, so that's super cool, and like, were like the kind of like, because she was from Cleveland. I have some friends who are really, really into your acting work. And they actually, I told them I was talking with you, and they gave me a list of a couple
I knew
questions.
Cleveland was going to be a segue to that. But I ain't no fool.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I've listened to a ton of interviews with you and read a lot, and like, I feel like a lot of people didn't really like ask you about the music, and like, the music's fascinating. Like,
thank you so much. And now that you've said that, and that we've dug into the music, don't be shy. You're welcome and invited to bring that other stuff up.
Well, it's mostly I got Cleveland-based questions, but my friend, they're a filmmaker. They made a film called Springfish. Their name's Gabriel Blywolf, and they play in a band called the Franz, which is a pro-public transit punk band.
Oh, please Google Translate.
And like, so they write songs about how awesome the bus is and like how public transportation is the best.
That is so funny. I love it.
It's awesome because every time I bring it up, the people are like, "Wait, what?"
I bet they haven't spent time in New York City.
They actually had.
I know.
They wrote songs about it.
Oh God, really?
But yeah, that's part of the fun they have with it, and the songs are really good, and they're really musically talented. But anyway.
I love it.
So when I told Gabe I was talking with you, they got all excited, and so one question was when you were going through Cleveland, like. In the film, Stranger Than Paradise, when the part was like, because I know it was broken up into two pieces. There was like the New York part, and then there's a trip where they go to see you in Cleveland.
And then there's the Florida part. So it's actually three. Yeah.
I didn't know if that was lumped together with, there was a budget for this part now. But there is that whole transition where you go. It blew my mind, like, whoa, that's Cleveland. It still looks the same.
Yeah, wow. Does it still look the same?
For the most part, yeah. There's some changes,
New York sure doesn't. Like, the New York that's in that film is kind of an incredible historical record, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
But go ahead. Cleveland was a new world to me at that time.
That's what I was going to ask. Was that your first time going, and like going from like New York to Cleveland, even just for a little bit? What was that experience like?
I toured just a little bit in America before then with the theater, but not that much. And for sure, seeing Cleveland, it really did bring home the fact that this New York that we live in, that I know and that I love and that I think that as part of America is, wow, it's not really America, is it? It's very different. So spending time in Cleveland was like, what is this? But on the other hand, we were really busy shooting. Also, it was freezing cold. So I didn't get to totally explore it. So I just don't want to seem like arrogant, like I really know what Cleveland's all about. I'd actually been back there once or twice, and it is a cool city, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff out of Cleveland.
Were you performing with the once or twice times you came back? Was it like a performance or just going through?
Once I think I was just going through, and another time I did actually do a little project, but it was in a school, and it wasn't a show, and it was just, but I still don't feel like I really fully know the city.
Was it that one scene where you're like, this is the lake and it's just snow? Yeah. That's not far off.
That's not far off. Wow. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, Jim Jarmusch is from near there. I mean, right. He's from Ohio. He's from,
or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Not totally sure, but
And now, did you meet him through the theater?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
yes, indeed.
So, like, kind of jumping from like the theater gigs that you're doing to a film like this, I imagine it was kind of that comfortableness. But was it strange? The kind of like because of the sense of like how kind of like structured in a way it was.
Well, it wasn't all that structured. Let's not get carried away.
Yeah, but
it was still a little bit loose. I think my sense of it was looser than it came out. It has a wonderful structure actually, and I think it is kind of structured in a really solid way, but in a great way. But when we started working on it, it wasn't. It was Jim had a solid idea and I think just a little bit of a script, and we rehearsed a lot, and we worked out a lot of the dialogue and even some of what would happen through rehearsals. So, I mean, he was responsible for the vision and for holding it all together. But there was definitely a lot of looseness in the process at first than is apparent on screen. It was a big responsibility, for me to carry the lead. And I had been on film before, various student films, and also my theater group, not my theater group, but the one I grew up in, used film a lot. So I had been on film in those works, and I had some really big parts in some of the shows. And still stepping out of that container and having this big responsibility in another different container was for sure scary and a challenge. But I just was with friends, so that felt good. And with, again, kind of like-minded friends, who were in the same universe, creative universe that I was in. So that felt comforting. And I just did my thing, which was, as far as I knew, it was just whatever you do, don't act.
Wow. I think that's like amazing advice. Like, that's really well said. And it's kind of reminiscent to the scribbled notes of Marc Ribot. Here, we're going to do this. Like, carrying that weight of that performance, but like being a little more delayed because it's a film and then seeing it later.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you ever have you ever done music with John Louie?
Yes.
Yeah.
I sang a little bit on his first Marvin Pontiac record. I do some harmonies and backgrounds, and it was a great session, and I love that record. And I think he's a phenomenal musician and composer and music maker and painter too.
Yeah. Like, coming from so I'd imagine you acted with him before, but with acting with someone like that, or anyone in general, like with acting with them and then like making music, is it like a different headspace, or do you find it to be a similar headspace?
Making music with wait, you mean?
Sorry.
Yeah, can you repeat that? I'm just trying to follow the question.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Making music with someone you acted with, so like already sharing this joint performance, but in a different like headspace or a different mode. Like when crossing, like going from acting with someone to working with them on a record, do you find, is it a similar headspace and approach, or do you have a different like way to approach that when you're switching?
No.
No?
I don't think it's different. I think it's we had, I knew him as a musician first, really,
okay.
Anyway. And so I've always associated him first and foremost with being a musician. So there was no, and I think also, that's just a little interesting aside, but I think singing a song, and performing probably instrumentally too, but singing it even more so is just telling a story, and is really not all that different from acting in some ways. I think you're inhabiting a character, and you're telling a story. I really noticed this when I did that TV show Louie, and I had not acted in a long time, but I'd been doing quite a lot of performances. I've been consistently working as a musician, and I was scared to death doing that show. Like, wow, how am I going to do this? I haven't done this in a while. And Louis was actually very cool about it. I said, "Don't worry, just do it." And when we did it, it was like, oh, this is kind of the same muscle I use for singing a song. This is actually not some alien thing.
I think that's well said. That's super interesting. Yeah, because like I've talked with some other people about like um, acting in like music and how they think uh, it's different or it's similar. And one thing that really stuck out to me was I talked with Victor Wooten, and one of his
Oh
things is
yeah.
right. One of his like philosophies is I think he said I think every musician should take an acting class, and after talking with some friends about some techniques and stuff, a lot of that seems really compelling to really get into the song as the same way to kind of get into a character. And all that being
That's
said,
amazing. I love that he
yeah,
said that. That's really cool.
it's yeah, and like that, I think that speaks so highly of his musicianship in a way. Um, but like, I think that's what makes uh, I Hate Memory like and the anti-musical so like potent is it's really driving from those two things of your creative expression, and like I
Yeah,
think they beautifully come together in this.
I love that. That's and in the live show there is a little bit more uh quote acting, and I use that term very, with a giant grain of salt, as I've already made clear, but you know what I mean. So there
Yeah.
is more of that part of me in it too. I think that it's interesting if I think about a lot of singers, musicians who have transitioned to acting or being in a film, like it often works quite well, surprisingly well. And whereas like models maybe not so much, or people coming from uh, I don't know, other kinds of celebrities coming from other modalities to acting often doesn't quite work. But there's something about musicians or especially singers transitioning to acting that can more often than not work surprisingly well. And my theory is that's why, because when they're performing a song on stage, there is kind of a similar something muscle being used.
Was it that and like I think it works with like people who kind of do stand up too seem to transition well into
Mm-hmm.
that like
Mm-hmm.
that
Yep.
vocal expression. Do
Yep.
uh, what's papaya ice cream? Like that's part of is that part of the show? Like that was noted multiple times and in the song.
Honestly, it's just in the song, and
Yeah,
we just tried to put that little blurb about the show I did write with Stu, and
yeah,
he's great like that. And it's really, trying to cut to the essence of the matter by mentioning these sort of arbitrary things, I think was rather than this show is a coming of age, uh, you know, but like papaya ice cream means a lot to me personally, because it's like, I came here at age 11, and what the fuck is papaya ice cream? First of all, what the fuck is papaya? And
right.
second of all, you can even make ice cream out of it. It's like, uh, everything is new, and crazy. And it's like, this is a place where you can have papaya ice cream. I love it. I'm in. It's like the amusement park.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's such a well. What two strange luxuries put together?
Exactly. Exactly.
I had a friend who came in from Turkey for to visit an aunt, and I was showing her around. And like one thing that blew her mind was there's a gas station where you can use a screen to order food, and like I that is crazy to think about, and like. I never thought about how bizarre that is until I saw her. Like, what is this? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's like it's funny, you know, in a weird way. The papaya ice cream is almost the inverse, but like a parallel inverse to the
Yeah.
whole TV dinner thing too, in
Oh
Stranger Than
yeah,
Paradise.
yeah, yeah. 'Cause- well, no, that's an excellent version of it because it's like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
actually,
yeah.
I forgot Gabe's questions. I didn't even ask him. They wanted to know the actress who played Aunt I can't remember her
Aunt
name.
Lottie.
Aunt Lottie. Um,
Yes.
where did she come from, and like how was it working with her?
It was really funny. I kind of think she really truly was like that in
Yeah,
real
it seems
life.
like not acting. Like,
Yep, yep. And she's great, actually. But I think she's passed away, and she was the aunt of the producer, Jim Stark. I believe she was his aunt. And she really lived in Cleveland, and I guess he was from Cleveland. So there's all connection. Again, this was a time when we were all very resourceful. You know, it's like use your friends, use the people you know, use their aunts if you have to.
yeah, but
Yeah.
that's so charming about it. Was that her house that the scene was shot in when you guys go to Cleveland?
You know, I don't remember, but that's a good question. I'm not totally sure, but it seems like it might have been because, like I said, we had to be working on a shoestring.
Yeah, that's really cool because like Gabe, when they made their film, they made it all out of like his dad's house and like friends like backyard. You know, like it was all like do it. What can we use for
DIY.
DIY?
Yeah.
And there's
I mean, it's so funny that there was that. Sorry to interrupt.
oh no, you're
I'm
good.
just laughing because, you know, there's been these various phases of people talking about DIY, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh, we got to go back to DIY, or like people are like, wow, that's the new thing. Just get a little more DIY. And I'm sort of like, of course, part of it is my age, but I come from a world like, what are you talking about? Everything we did all the time was DIY. I kind of want, like, I want the glamour now. Like, just give me an assistant. Give me like, I am born, raised, and bred in DIY culture to the max.
I totally understand that. Give me someone who can book this show. I don't want to send
Exactly. Hello, thank you.
I earned someone who can book this show for me at this point. I built the venues. We don't need that. Like,
yeah, exactly.
But that's how it is. Like, oh, and like, gosh, how great the booking agent would be.
Sure as hell true.
Right, but and there's a different, like, it's interesting now. There's like different levels of DIY. Yeah, I made it myself. What'd you do? Well, I sent the design to this person and he printed it. Like,
yeah, but it's also there was a period, and I think maybe that was a little longer ago, where it was almost like this cool new movement or something, and it's like, dudes. You I guess you weren't around when it wasn't like a choice. It wasn't like this cool new hip thing, DIY thing, and like a label we put on it, and it was just like we didn't even know anything else.
But yeah, it's I guess the highlight, the magic behind the behavior is like, hey, it's cool to do your own thing. Sweet. But
yeah, totally.
That's the highlight of it. But it's totally no, this is the only way to do it. Like, there's no other option. It's just do it yourself every way, or you can't do it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And if you've been and if you've been DIYing it for many decades, you might even get a little tired.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's not fun to screen print every shirt.
Yeah. Yep.
But I got more ink because
yeah.
But and another question they had was before I forget, Screaming Jay Hawkins. That was so cool. Like, as a Clevelander, to see that Screaming Jay was your man, right? And like that was featured
Yeah.
as like, I'm going to Cleveland here. And I don't know if you knew at the time, I'm sure you did, but Screaming Jay being a Cleveland-based artist, were you familiar with Screaming Jay or any of his backstory before the film?
I think that Jim, I don't know. He might have performed at Squad because, we had a club and a lot of people came through. And I don't know if Jim met him there or if he knew him from Cleveland. I really don't want to spread false rumors. I know that I met Screaming Jay at Squad, and I think it may have been after the film, but I think he had been there before too. But I know for sure that that was totally Jim's idea to bring him into the film and to bring that song into the film. And I don't even know if his career was really like happening at the time. Like he sort of been a little bit somewhat forgotten or struggling, or I don't know. I don't think he was like a huge deal in those days, right?
Right. I think it's more of like he had the hit in like the character. There was the character performance, and like I believe it was interesting because like Gabe, they were telling me that like Screaming Jay, he did another film with Jim Jarmusch, and like he was in the war, and like he was really racist towards Japanese people, and he did this film, right? Apparently, and like I don't want to spread false whatever, but this is the story's really cool because like he because of going through the war and having that mindset, right?
Yeah.
And he did this film with Jim, and there was an actress who was Japanese, and they end up falling in love and like being his last marriage before he passed.
Wow!
Jay, right? And like that's what Gabe was telling me, and like right. So like. That's why I was like curious because like with the kind of shtick he had, I imagine it's like because in the 50s he was terrifying people, like
and I will say that in a very different way than we were talking about before with some of those heavy duty punkish tough girls, but he also scared me a little bit when I met him. Not in that way, but because he was there was a tiny bit of something unhinged about him. When I remember him sitting around at Squad and talking, and maybe it was just his manic energy but I didn't even know that history about him having been in the war. And so that's really super interesting because then he's just another one of these people that are brilliant and damaged that end up doing art or singing or performing, but there's like a character that emerges, but there's also sort of some trauma probably mixed in there and buried in there, which is like a lot of us, really,
right?
Isn't it?
And it's examining the kind of good and bad of it all. And like,
yep.
It's interesting working in an art space. Like I work at this art gallery, you get these characters and these people that roll in there, feel drive to be there, right, and to do something. And it's interesting, like you pick up on some of that manic stuff where you're like, I don't know if I want to be around this person for more than I have to. But it's interesting that sense that draws people to this space, and you don't know if it's like, are they a manic creator? Are they a manic like? What is their trauma? Is this not? Is this like where no one judges them? That's why they're here. Like,
that's such a deep topic that I'm almost tempted to not even respond because I'm going to have to go in a few minutes and we'll be here for another hour.
Okay.
But
no, Esther, I really appreciate your
deep,
time.
Rich. No, I'm telling you, that's a rich topic that you just touched on, and there's a lot to explore there.
Well, one day I would love to, with the next record, let's
chat about. I would love to, because I'm actually super interested in that, and we're all on some spectrum of that, but some people are much further on the spectrum, and it's a very interesting thing, that phenomenon. It's also interesting how we respond to it and what we do with it, and it's like, and the fetishizing of it can be actually quite dangerous,
Right,
you know?
right.
And I mean, like this is like the most cartoonish example, but like very topical, right? Is Marilyn Manson and
Right.
like that character he created. And then look what's coming out now.
Yeah.
It's kind of.
Yeah, no, definitely. Or even like Kanye. Like here's someone who's definitely suffered trauma. And like people glorify and like highlight all these things he says that, you know, most people would not pay attention to had it been anyone else saying that same thing, you know.
Exactly. It's a really deep thing. And there's also the flip side of it all, which is a lot of really fucked up, traumatized people doing stuff that if they weren't doing that stuff, if they weren't doing the art, if they weren't doing the work, then they might be out there being serial killers, you know, or like, so in a way it probably does help them heal the trauma to some extent, but it's a very complex thing. So that's why it's another conversation probably.
For sure. And I would love to pick your mind about Sun Ra, because growing up around Sun Ra and like people like Screamin' Jay, like musically had to like really make that tightrope of comfortable, uncomfortableness.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, Sun Ra, they were like from another world, literally. I'm just repeating what they said.
Yeah.
But you know, they were one of the house bands. They came from Philly in a bus on a regular basis, all 30 of them or whatever, load into our theater. And because there were so many of them, I didn't really have a personal relationship with like any of them, but we would just nod and say hi. And it was amazing. It was they put on such a show. I was way too young to appreciate the depth of the musical genius that was going on there with Sun Ra. Like I was a very sophisticated 12 and 13-year-old, but not that sophisticated. So to me, some of that went a little over my head, but I still do remember thinking space is the place is very cool. I was like, yeah.
Eszter, I really, really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure to dive into your music and your career. And so thank you so much for chatting with me.
I really, really liked your questions. And these are my favorite kinds of conversations where we actually have a conversation and not just like hitting publicity bullet points.
Yeah.
So thank you. I really, really liked it. And let's do another one about that dark but very interesting topic sometime.
I would love to. We'll do a part 2 when you got the next batch, and
awesome.
or if the show's on the road, and we'll dive into the darkness of it.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.